Welcome to another episode of Source and Company, the Source and Company podcast. I am your host, Source, of course. You can always follow me at Smitty Source on Instagram, at Smitty Source on Twitter, and feel free to subscribe to the Source and Company YouTube channel. So y'all know that normally I like to talk to people who have some sort of connection to Richmond or Virginia, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it's not that way, but most of the time it is. Today's guest would have been, well, today's company, I should say, would have been a guest either way. He is, I have to break out my notepad for this, retired FBI supervisory special agent / profiler, former NYC prosecutor, writer and producer on Criminal Minds, which is my daughter Jada's favorite show, and author of 3 books, including Call Me God, which is the untold story of the DC sniper, which I will have questions about. He also has his XG Productions company, and he has 3 podcasts at the moment. Locked Up Abroad, which is about people being locked up abroad, firsthand account. Best Case, Worst Case, and Real Crime Profile. And the kicker is he lived in Richmond for a couple of years, I believe. So, perfect. Today's guest, today's company, Jim Clemente. How are you doing, Jim?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
I am great. I appreciate you taking the time to join me.
No problem.
How's it going? You're in LA?
I am in LA, yes.
How's quarantine treating you?
Well, not too bad. Luckily, I'm a writer and a podcaster, and I can do all that from home. So I am very fortunate to be able to be extremely busy at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to keep my spirits up, and I try to go out for walks every evening around sunset just to stay sane, I suppose.
Indeed, indeed. It's a lot of that going on in my household as well. My daughters, they're both athletes, and so it's tough to work out. Obviously, you can do your home workout, but they go for runs. I'm good, though. I'm actually, as far as someone can be enjoying being kind of forced to stay in the house, I'm enjoying it. Same as you. So definitely trying to appreciate the time. So let's just jump into it.
Sure.
How did you even get into the lane of law enforcement, I guess we'll say? Like, was it a childhood dream? Did it just happen, or get there?
Well, it's interesting because my family had sort of a brush with the law in a bad way, with crime anyway. My grandfather had a construction company in New York, and he was accidentally killed on the job, and then his son took over the company, and he was accidentally killed on the job a month later. And it turned out these mob union guys took over the company, stole it. And then my father went to law school on the GI Bill and sued to get the company back. By the time he won that case, they had dismantled the company and sold off all the assets. So it was basically worthless. And that's sort of the foundation that my family, grew from. And so I think my brother and I, who both became FBI agents, wanted to be on the side of truth and justice and not on the side of the bad guys. So I think that might have driven us both into, the crime area and justice. And basically, my brother became a cop and I became a prosecutor, and then we both became FBI agents.
Man. Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually, about your brother Tim, right?
Yes.
Man, yeah, I was going to ask how do 2 brothers become FBI agents, but that makes a lot of sense.
Well, hopefully you'll be hearing about it on a show soon, because we actually have been discussing with the network, doing the show about just that topic. So hopefully that'll all work out.
Excellent. That'll be great. So you mentioned, I mentioned that you lived in Richmond for a time.
Yes.
I was curious, like, what do you remember? What side of town you lived in? What part of the area you lived in?
Yeah, I lived on the West End. Basically, I owned a pub there called Potter's Pub on Three Chopped Road, and I lived just a couple blocks away. It's right by the Richmond University of Richmond area, and it was a great old pub. It had been there for many years, and I took it over. It was called Potter's Pub and Grill when I took it over, and my business partner was the chef. I did some of the business stuff, and this is while I was still an FBI agent, though. So I really only spent the weekends at the pub, but had a house there a couple blocks away, and so for about 4 years, I had a place in Richmond, and I really liked it. It's a nice town because it's not overcrowded by any stretch of the imagination. I came from New York City, so I saw it as a smaller city, but very interesting architecturally, and the river and the walkways and the bridges that go across it, and sort of all the places you can explore. I just loved it. I thought it was amazing, and there was some great old architecture there that I think there's it looks like an old train station right off the highway, and I just love old time buildings like that. They're so ornate, and the workmanship in them, I just beyond belief.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of New York transplants that end up in Virginia.
Hmm.
Of them tend to complain about Virginia and tell us how great New York is over and over. But I understand you love what you love, and of course your hometown
Yeah.
will be your first love anyway.
Yeah, I definitely love New York and the energy there, but there's no way that I could have the quality of life in New York that I have in Virginia. I
That's
still have I still have a place in Virginia up in Fredericksburg,
okay.
but I sold the pub and the house there when I got into a little. I had cancer. I
Wow.
was the first responder on 9/11, and a whole bunch of us got lymphoma, and cops and firemen and FBI agents, and had to have a bone marrow transplant. That was about 16 years ago now. So I'm very lucky to be alive.
I'll say glad you're still with us, man.
Yeah, thanks.
You said, oh, so okay, you were. I'm not trying to get too deep into it, but you said from 9/11 was the issue. So 2001, so that was 19 years, and then a couple years later, you found out you had cancer.
Yeah. Yeah,
Gotcha.
apparently I had it for a couple of years before I got diagnosed. They said that almost all the FBI agents that got diagnosed with cancer around that time came in as stage 4. Um, and I think what it was because we're used to just fighting through things. We just thought we were tired, and we just worked out harder. We just tried harder, and then finally realized something must be really wrong. And then I got diagnosed, and went through some hell for a little while. But like I said, I mean, I had great doctors and nurses at Johns Hopkins, and they saved my life.
Wow. A friend of mine just mentioned doctors from Johns Hopkins in my last interview.
Hmm.
So obviously well, not obviously, but the FBI came after the prosecutor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I was a prosecutor in the Bronx. Yeah.
So childhood to prosecutor. How do I mean?
How do you become a prosecutor?
Job for everybody, but
Yeah.
how does one make that leap?
Well, I came from a big family. My father was a lawyer. My mother was a nurse. I have 5 brothers and sisters. We're all just sort of pretty active, and I was actually a chemistry major and philosophy minor at Fordham. And then I think I was doing research in chemistry at the time, and I realized I didn't like the idea of being stuck in a lab for the rest of my life. Not that I didn't like it, but it just I wanted to do something involving people. And so had a conversation with my father, and I found out then and only then that he was a chemistry major as well.
Wow.
And he never talked to me, and I never thought he was, because he was a lawyer. And turns out he went from that to law. And then I read some of his cases, and they all had to do with science and technology. And I was like, I could do this. So I went to law school, but fell in love with criminal law while I was in law school, And the only job I applied for was as a prosecutor. As I actually had considered legal aid and being in the prosecutor's office. Legal aid is New York City's um, what are they called? I can't remember what they're called in LA. Public defender's office.
Defender? Okay.
Yeah, and and so I thought I would do one or the other. So I did sort of an internship with both. And I found out right away that on the prosecution side, there's all the discretion is there. And if you really want to help people, you can do it much more effectively from the prosecutor side. You can help victims of crime and you can help justice by getting the right person, not the wrong person. And if the wrong person gets arrested, it's all in the hands of the prosecutor, whether you go forward or not. So I really felt like that's where I belonged. So I went there, worked there for about 5 years total, and did a lot of trials and really learned to think on my feet.
Let me ask you a question. Just do you think that if, I guess, if the world were starting over and we could start from the beginning, do you think that we would still end up with cases that are the best lawyer wins as opposed to everybody's looking for the right answer?
Yeah, so I think that one of you bring out a very important flaw in our system, right? And that is that money can buy you the best lawyers, the best lawyer or lawyers. Think of, somebody like Epstein or OJ for that matter. You
Yeah,
have multiple lawyers who are able to overwhelm a prosecutor's office. So, but the average person or the poor person could never do that. And so that's an inequity in the system. And then you have the jury system. And some of these cases are incredibly complicated, but wealthy defendants can put a media barrage out there that can influence jurors and the public, and poor people can't do it. So I think both of those things, if we were to start it all over again, if they were going to ask me, I would definitely try to do something different. I think all people should either get appointed a lawyer that the court appoints. For example, in military courts,
mhm.
they have the Judge Advocate General's office,
Yeah, yeah,
JAGs. And a JAG can get appointed as a prosecutor or a defense attorney in any given case. And they're the same people that fight either side of it. And that is actually much more equitable because they're apparently searching for the truth, not just for an outcome that they get paid
right.
to find. So I do see that there's issues with it, and you see it more from the outside. Like when you're in it, you're doing your job and you're overwhelmed. I had over 200 cases in my caseload. I had to be incredibly vigilant about getting everything done because I cared about the people who came in as victims of crimes. But I also made it a point to tell defense attorneys, if you believe your client is actually innocent, then come to me, talk to me. If they can convince me that they are actually innocent, I'll withdraw the case. I do not want to prosecute somebody who's not actually guilty of the crime. So that's kind of a rare thing, but
Right.
it happens. I mean, there are a lot of prosecutors who only want justice, but there are some who only want stats, and that's where the problem comes in.
I 100% agree. 100% agree. So you moved on from there to the FBI
Hmm.
direct shot?
Well, yeah, actually, what happened was when I was a prosecutor, I went after the guy who molested me when I was a kid. And I went after him I went to the FBI, NYPD, Joint Sexual Exploitation of Children Task Force. And they did the investigation. I actually did some undercover work for them and
Wow.
locked the guy up. And at the end of the case, the agent handed me an application to the FBI. I actually said to him, they would take me even though I was the victim. And he said, you're a survivor, which was an amazing transition, right? And of course they would take you. Oh my God, you did us a great job in this case. So we'd be lucky to have you. So it really turned something that had been really a negative before that in my life into something positive. And then I would work bank robberies and violent crimes, major political and public corruption cases, cold case homicides. And then for the last 12 years, I became an FBI profiler, and I worked serial killer cases, child abduction cases, and, the really the worst things that humans do to other humans.
Man, how do you reconcile that? I mean, I was going to get into the DC sniper thing, but how do you reconcile that as a person? Like, I mean, obviously you got to take some of it back with you home, but I
Mhm.
have to try to kind of compartmentalize it at some point or
Yeah.
like lose it.
What we do is we call it a clinical detachment, and it's the same thing that surgeons do when they operate on a person. They don't think about the whole person. They literally concentrate all their energies on wherever they're operating. They sort of cover everything else up with blue, and they need to focus on this because they have other people to focus on those things. And when you're doing an investigation, especially as a profiler, if you allow the emotional component to overwhelm you, then what happens is you're blind to some of the nuances of the behavior. And we really need to focus on the behavior, the victimology, what happens at the crime scene, the preparation before the crime and the post-offense behavior. All that is incredibly important for us to reverse engineer the crime and figure out the kind of person who committed that crime. So you actually put up this wall, and it allows you to look at the crimes very clinically and do your job. Now, does that catch up to you? Does that actually bother you at home at night when you can't sleep? Does it cause you not to sleep? Of course, it can do a lot of things, and that's why you have to have something to balance you out. You have to have something that you do that's creative or that's physical, something that you can kind of use to sort of undo or get out the aggression that's caused by having to see these horrific crime scenes all the time.
Right. What did you have?
Well, what I like to do is basically I like to restore houses. Um, and I use the word restore rather than renovate. And I actually wrote an episode called Restoration. We could talk about that one later. But in which Shamar Moore was doing that. And I loved because I think it's in my blood. I actually believe that it's in my genes. This love for sort of granite. My great grandfather, my grandfather were stonemasons, and they worked with granite and marble. Um, and I believe I got that love in my genes. And so what I did was over the course of my career, I would try to buy old houses, tried to get them that were over 100 years old, and
Mm,
then I moved in, and I slowly restored it to what it used to look like. I learned how to do plasterwork and woodwork, and yeah, I would update the kitchen and the bathrooms, but the rest of the house, I would try to just restore what was there originally, because I believe the vision of the original builders and the art that they used to build was so amazing, compared to boxes that are thrown up, 100 at a time. So what I tried to do, there's a lot of physical activity, which I think is good to get that out, but
right.
then stepping back at the end and looking, saying, I did that. I created something new. I fixed something that was damaged into something that's now back to perfection. So I think that really helped me. And it was not a conscious decision, but I gravitated towards it.
It's kind of similar to the law enforcement. I mean, if you kind of think about it,
Mhm.
restoration thing and making something that was damaged better or trying to make something that was damaged.
Right. Yeah, the whole justice system. And I
Yeah.
also turned to writing. I love writing. When I was a kid, I was dyslexic and thought I was stupid because it took me a lot longer to read things because the letters would kind of float and overlap and things like that, and I'd be like, what is this?" And so I had trouble reading. And then when I was a junior in college, my younger brother got diagnosed with it, and I realized, oh my God, I have the same thing. And then we did eye exercises for a year, and it was gone. I I have never had a problem again. I was able to go to law school and read 250 pages a night without a problem. I mean, it was just a whole different world for me. And I always looked up to authors as these amazing people who could put all those words together. And eventually I realized I could do the same thing.
So you weren't diagnosed until college?
Yeah. I had never read a book on my own that wasn't demanded by schoolwork. And usually what I would do is find out what I was supposed to read next year and buy the book early so that I would be able to read it in time for class the
Wow,
following year.
that's heavy.
Yeah, so that's another reason why I gravitated towards math and science, because there wasn't a lot of reading, a lot of symbols and numbers, which they were fine on the page. It's just the words that screwed me up.
Wow. So you mentioned your writing, and I mentioned your writing as well. Uh, Call Me God
Yeah.
is DC Sniper.
It's a story of the DC Sniper, and it's a story of how two very different FBI brothers from very different perspectives and backgrounds came together to work this case. It was a terror case. Let's put it out there. The fact is that what happened in the space of 27 hours in Montgomery County, Montgomery County, Maryland, was unprecedented. 6 people were murdered in 27 hours. It was a 50% increase in their annual murder rate in one day.
Hmm.
So they were overwhelmed. There's no question about it. And at the time, the country was still reeling from 9/11. And so basically, the FBI had stepped away from criminal cases and was only doing counterterrorism to protect the
Right.
country. And as a result, uh, the local departments that were overwhelmed were running this case. And I believe strategically, the sniper was using the small jurisdictions around Washington, D.C., so that he wouldn't be going head to head with the FBI and the federal agents, but he would be only dealing with small town sheriff's departments. Yet he would get the benefit of the biggest media market in the world, which is Washington, D.C. So he'd get the coverage he wanted without
Right.
having to face directly the biggest force in the country, which is the FBI. So at that point, I realized this guy was really smart. And because of the fact that he was just incredibly effective at planning and executing these shootings, he was a ghost. Nobody saw him. That this guy was somebody who was probably police or military trained. And then from there, on top of that, he was probably somebody who saw action, because there's a very major difference between pointing a gun at a target and shooting
Hmm.
and pointing a gun at a human being and shooting. And to be able to do that without decompensating at all, to actually be just calm, cool, and collected throughout that, told me that this guy had seen action.
Wow.
But at the same time, the communications were almost juvenile in nature. And so we had a major argument within the profiling room. How could it be that this guy is so sophisticated when he's shooting, but so unsophisticated when he's writing to us? And I said, either we have a guy who just for some reason decompensates when he's writing, or for the first time in US history, we have a sniper team. One older, one younger, one controlling the younger one. And I went as far as saying he could be controlling the younger one by sexually victimizing him. And then, of course, 11 years later, Malvo came out and said that's exactly what was happening.
Man, I just remember one particular day uh, when it was said that he was in Richmond, and I just remember everybody being shook. Everybody was shook.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going to get gas, and I was like, I'll be fine. I'm going to get gas. By the time I went in and came out, I'm ducking, dodging, because
Right.
I mean,
Everybody in the area was terrorized.
yeah,
And yeah, I was at my pub that Friday night, so that I could walk our customers to and from their cars with my hand on my gun because I was worried. And little did I know that that very night he would shoot somebody in Ashland coming out of a restaurant and just 10 miles away. I mean, it was just unbelievable that they had such a wide range of their murders. They were striking at anybody in any place. Nobody was safe. And if you listen to Call Me God, you'll hear about how close it just how close it came to my family. So it's a very, very terrorizing kind of situation. And one of our own FBI analysts was killed at a Home Depot. And she died in her husband's arms in the parking lot. It was just terribly tragic. It was something that I think people really need to learn from, because these are things that happen. And a lot of times people don't understand what really goes on behind the scenes. So that's why myself and my brother and wrote Call Me God, so that we could tell that story of what really went on behind the scenes.
And that's on Audible, you said, right?
It is. It's on Audible. So if you have Amazon Prime, you can get it, or you can get a free subscription or a 1-month trial to Audible and download it.
Man. So I know I could talk to you like for 6 hours straight and never cover everything, but I'm gonna try to jump around so that we can hit on a couple of things that I really, for me personally, probably that's really what it is. So let's see. Now You See Me. I saw that that goes back to XG Productions. What's the meaning of XG?
Oh, XG is former G-men and women. So they used to call FBI agents, the bad guys used to call us G-men.
Mhm.
And so we're ex-G-men. So, and women, because we have plenty of former federal women who used to work for the FBI or Department of Justice or other federal agencies, as well as cops and prosecutors and military people, that they're not only make up our company, but also we manage people in those areas so that they can have an opportunity to tell authentic stories in Hollywood. We started the company, my brother and I, for two reasons. One, to add authenticity to productions, and two, to try to use Hollywood's money to actually accomplish some good.
Wow. That was that was a thought going in.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's, I mean, justice is a big thing for us. And the fact is that television actually affects our society incredibly deeply. For example, when LA Law came out, this was a show about LA lawyers who in this law firm, and there were a bunch of strong female lawyer characters. Female enrollment in law school went up 20% during that time period.
Hmm.
When the X-Files came out, the FBI went from 10,000 pending applications to 100,000 pending applications.
Wow.
People wanted to become FBI agents because of that show. Criminal Minds, when that show started, there were no doctoral programs in forensic psychology around. But by the time we ended the series this past season, every major university across the country and many around the world have forensic science doctorate programs. It, it's
The art.
forensic psychology doctoral programs. Yeah. So it's just TV can affect the world. I think the same thing happened with Will and Grace. I think Will and Grace was pivotal in changing middle America's views on homosexuality. And they were brilliant in how they did it. They had two gay guys on the show, but they weren't together. They each had a sort of female partner to hang out with, right? And I think that made it a little more palatable, but it showed people, well, gay people are just regular people and they're funny too. So that's a good thing. So I think that TV has an amazing opportunity to influence the world. And so they also have a responsibility to do it right. And so that's one of the reasons why we got into it.
So life imitating art more than art imitating life.
Well, it's life imitating art, imitating life.
Fair. That's fair. So I mentioned Now You See Me strictly because it's my oldest daughter's favorite movie.
Really?
And yeah, your company did the
Tech
consulting
advising.
with
Yeah.
FBI.
Yeah, my brother Tim did that particular movie, And yeah, it was. I love that movie because of all the intricacies and the twists and turns, the things you don't expect. It's
Hmm.
really cool, and magic is always cool. So the movie
Yeah.
magic is even cooler.
Yeah, her favorite scene is not, I don't know if you remember the movie, but it's like they're being frisked and they're throwing a card that
Yeah,
people
through the metal detectors and all
yeah,
that
all
stuff.
that.
How they, yeah, that was great.
Favorite scene of all time for her. Uh, as far as Criminal Minds, is it possible to put a percentage on how many of the cases are based on real life or real case?
That's a good question. Every single, I mean, certainly the first few years, they were all based on my cases or the cases my colleagues worked. Um, After a while, the writers in the writers' room, usually there's like 8 to 10 of them in the writers' room because you have to have several in production at a time, and, it's a really quick process. I mean, you have 8 days to shoot a show. You have 2 weeks to write a script,
Mm.
8 days to shoot it. I mean, we're constantly just churning them out, 22 to 24 episodes a year. It was pretty tough keeping that schedule up. But in that process, a lot of a lot of the writers would come to me and say, "Yeah, I want to do an episode about this," and sometimes they would be really good, really accurate, real, and very easy to tell them cases like that. Or they'll do some research about a particular serial killer, and they'll want to do a show about that. But other times there were, let me just say, extremely bizarre, okay? And what my job was is to try to pull them back to reality. And so I would typically try to take the learning points from real cases, multiple cases, and blend them together and use that to sort of bring these extreme ideas into reality.
Yeah.
So, uh, even though not every episode was the foundation of them, weren't specifically one case or another, I made sure that every single episode blended in real profiling, real psychology, real behavior from real cases so that the learning points would still be there because I felt the responsibility. I wanted to teach these viewers, and not only across the country, but around the world, about who the real offenders are. We like to say that, I mean, in general, people like to think that you'd see a serial killer and recognize them. Well, the
Right.
fact is, the reason why they're so effective is you don't realize they're serial killers. We wanted to show that these people are in every walk of life, they're in every neighborhood across the country. They just exist. They're human beings, they're not monsters that you can see.
Mm.
And because of that, it's like an insidious thing. They're living within our borders, they're smiling in our faces. And right from the start, like for example, What Fresh Hell, Mandy Patinkin, uh, really was struck by that. And when I met him, when he came to meet me in Virginia, well, he
Mhm.
came to interview profilers in Quantico, and then they called me up, and I had been recovering from the bone marrow transplant, so I was in town and asked me to meet him, and I did, and I told him about this case, and that became What Fresh Hell, which is a really compelling story, but it blends two different child abduction cases that I'd worked and the learning points from them together.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, so, like I said, I was going to just throw out a couple of topics.
Sure.
So, John Benet Ramsey, there was was it
The
the
case of.
case of? Yes.
Yeah, so I started the Case of series with bunch of my colleagues to go over cases that we had worked as professionals in law enforcement to try to share with the world what we believed actually happened, what the investigation showed us, as opposed to what you see in the media. So we did JonBenet Ramsey, we did Kaylee Anthony. These are cases that people had a lot of questions about, and we attempted to answer those questions in our series. Um, and I believe that we have an obligation to do that, not only for education of the public, but also so that the victims get justice.
Do you think there's a psychological reason why, or do you think there's a reason, I guess, why we identify with JonBenet Ramsey as JonBenet Ramsey, but we look at Casey Anthony, because you rarely hear Kaylee Anthony. I mean, when you heard about it anyway,
Right.
you hear Casey Anthony more than anything, and she was the mom,
Right.
the child.
Yeah, I think part of it is, and this is something on Real Crime Profile that we really focus on. We call it the Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman case, not the OJ case. We call it the Reva Steenkamp case, not the Oscar Pistorius case. We focus on the victims because the victims are the people that I work for, not the offenders. The offenders are the people we catch and put in jail, and that's it. You know, we don't really focus on them other than interviewing them and learning from them, why they did what they did, how they developed, and so forth. That's one of the jobs of FBI profilers. But in this particular case, JonBenet Ramsey stands on the records as an unsolved case where Kaylee Anthony, we know that Casey Anthony had something to do with it, but the fact is that she was charged with first-degree murder in a case where the prosecution didn't even know actually how Kaylee was killed. And I told the prosecutors I did not believe that they should be charging first degree murder. I don't think that a jury is going to give the death penalty to a young woman like this. I don't think that it's going to happen and it's going to backfire. And they said, well, it's all or nothing for us. And that was their choice. And obviously it backfired, obviously. But what we do know is, you know, certain facts about how her body was disposed of and where, and literally it was behind the last house on the street where Casey Anthony lived. Right behind that house.
Wow.
That's where it was. And it's the kind of thing where if somebody kills a child in their home, then if they have no connection to that child or that home, there's really no reason for them to move the child. Because everybody's going to know the child is missing if you take the child away, right? So all the alarms are going to get raised. If you leave the kid there, then that's fine. All right, great. Everybody's going to know anyway. So if you move the child, you're risking somebody catching you during that movement period. Which is why most offenders who do move the victim the shortest distance possible. And I will tell you, the shortest distance possible to hide that body from the house was behind the last house on that street. And that's exactly where it was.
Wow. That's an amazing point that the average person, I'm sure, doesn't really consider.
Yeah.
Well, one last topic I'll throw at you. The Netflix, I guess it was done for Netflix specifically, right? Manhunt
Unabomber. Yes, it's on Netflix. It was done for Discovery and then put on Netflix. It's about the Unabomber case, and it's about my buddy Jim Fitzgerald, who I went through the FBI Academy with, I worked on the bank robbery task force with, and I ended my career with in the behavioral analysis unit. So our careers were parallel, and he became a forensic linguistic profiler. And when he retired, which was the year before I did, I sat down with him and I said, tell me the story, and at some point, I'm going to get this on the screen. And it took 10 years of, you know, writing and you know, selling and developing and all that to get it on the air, but it was on the air. And it tells that story about how, for the first time in U.S. history, Jim Fitzgerald uses an offender's words to determine the kind of person he is and to identify him 100% for the warrant. That's how Kaczynski was arrested. And had it not been for that, they wouldn't have been able to arrest him. They would have had to wait for him to do something else and then arrest him. So it was a real change in law enforcement. But I will say that that show is also fictional. It's not the actual documentary of it. But right now we're working on the audio documentary of that to tell, because in movies and TVs, you have to kind of shrink characters and combine them. And so
Right.
there's a lot of things that Jim Fitzgerald didn't actually do that they in that series they put on him.
Hmm.
We're going to tell the stories of all the people who actually worked the case and many of the victims. There
Man.
is one more thing I want to talk to you about, and that is in my experience in Criminal Minds. Um, I always tried to see if there was an opportunity to help somebody in their career as an actor as well. And there was one person who I basically was totally sorry, my alarm was going off. I was totally taken by when he came in and did the audition, and his name is Brandon Rush. And it's actually how my connection to you as
Absolutely.
well. And he was just his personality and just how incredibly honest and forthright and open and encouraging he's always been. We saw that in him, and we built our character around him once we met him. And he did such a great job for us that I made sure this was maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago when he first had a one-liner in our episode, and from that I wrote him into my final episode that I wrote of Criminal Minds, and they brought him back, and he became the SWAT commander, Commander Rush. And so he went from, probably generic detective number two to Agent Rush to Commander Brandon Rush. And to me, um, just to see his career flourish in between and to know what kind of a wonderful person he is, I was just so happy to get to know him and become friends with him. And he is just one of the most, wonderful and appreciative human beings on the planet. I just wanted to shout out to him because he's a great guy.
Yes, and I should definitely have done that because he definitely speaks highly of you, like
Uh,
highly. He made
well,
a point to say that you are what he called an angel.
oh, well, thank you.
Indeed. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to join me. I had one more question and it slipped my mind. Ah, man. Ah, man. Can't remember what it was though.
Um,
Uh, is there anything on the horizon that you might be able to share?
yeah, there are a couple things on the horizon. We're talking with one network about a show, scripted series with me and my brother. Our characters featured in it, and another one that that we're putting together. And we're not allowed to do any promotion for it before they do, so I can't really say what they're about. But let me just say that Criminal Minds was a huge part of my life and how I transitioned into becoming a writer producer. And I hope that I can continue to make shows like that, and work with the amazing people from you know Ed Bernero, who was the original showrunner, to Erica Messer, who took over for him, and to all the writers and producers and crew and an amazing cast. It was just an amazing family for 15 seasons, which
Yeah.
is, I believe, the seventh longest primetime drama ever in the history of TV. So it really was an incredible honor to be part of that show, and I hope that we'll see more from those kinds of stories.
Indeed. And of course, now it hit me. Bam. The last thing I will ask you. So, as I was doing research, you know, social media, Google, all that kind of stuff, the type of things that you talk about, well, your job first, and then the type of things you talk about on the podcast can lead to backlash from people, how they feel, how they see things. How do you, or do you even have to reconcile that in your own mind? Because I mean, I'm not super sensitive, but knowing that this much negativity is out here,
Yeah.
I mean, I might
Okay.
tend to look at it at some point.
Right. Well, absolutely. That's something that I had to learn, and it evolved over time. First of all, I realized pretty early on that controversy sells. I mean, it's why the news networks no longer just promote news. They don't just convey news.
Right.
They add opinion, and it has to be, one side or the other. And it's just, to me, that's ridiculous. But that's what sells. So I didn't shy away from controversy. Basically, if people had arguments against what I said, I engaged in the argument. When people attack me because of what I'm saying, I tell them that's infantile. It must stop right away, or I'll just block you, because that's not what this is about. If you want to engage in an argument, if you have a point of view, I would love to challenge you. I would love, because it challenges me and my own belief system. So
Right.
to me, that's a good exercise. But if you're just trying to attack me, then I'll realize all you're doing, you're trolling, you're being a jerk. Goodbye. That's it. And so I don't talk to them anymore. So I give them a chance. And if they still want to be jerks, then I let them be jerks. And I don't address every one of them. Obviously, there's a lot of people who don't like the fact that I have expert opinions on certain things, and cases that, people are just so locked into celebrity that they don't believe they could be doing anything wrong. They don't understand the nuances of what offending behavior is and so forth. But I know I'm trying to help people understand the reality of it, and those who don't want to listen won't listen. But if I still put the message out, there's a chance that somebody will be helped by it. So I do that. So anyway, other than that, I laugh at it now. I literally laugh. I just say, okay, great, this is wonderful. Another person's called me an idiot or saying I don't know what I'm talking about or whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, great. And I just put it aside, because I know that by now I've spent over 35 years amassing a tremendous amount of experience and expertise in particular areas. And I was one of 25 FBI profilers out of 14,000 agents. I rose to a level of training and experience and expertise that allowed me to do some pretty amazing work, to be involved in some amazing things. It's an honor. And sharing that information with other humans, I think, is my responsibility. And for somebody who, uh, sits at their computer and reads stuff online and watches 20 documentaries and thinks they have the same amount of knowledge and experience, well, they're wrong. I would definitely ask them whether they would go and get brain surgery from somebody who watched every episode of ER or Grey's Anatomy. I don't think they would do that. And I don't think they should do that with things as sophisticated and as literally important and life altering as serial offenders and sexual victimization offenders. Those things are very complicated. And it's important that everybody educates themselves, because we have to protect children. We have to protect our loved ones, young and old. And the way to do it is to know the truth, not what somebody thinks based on watching TV or reading stuff online. It's just not responsible.
Hey, that's fair. That's a great argument. Once again, Jim Clemente, I appreciate you taking the time to join me today on the Sources and Company podcast. Any social media you care to share?
Well, yeah, I'm on Instagram at the real Jim Clemente, I believe, and Jim Clemente at Jim Clemente on Twitter. And then XG Productions is on there as well, XG Productions 1, and at Real Crime Profile without the E at the end, and at BCWC1, which is Best Case, Worst Case 1. So yeah, there's a lot of places that I'm there, and I'm sure that you know, if you Google me, you'll find stuff, and you'll find plenty of people who hate me. You know, but hopefully the people that actually know me and understand where my heart is and what I want to do, which is help people, hopefully they won't hate me. That's all I can care about.
Excellent. Well,
All
once
right,
again, Jim, I appreciate you joining me.
it's great being your company.
Thank you. And that's it, y'all. Source and Company.